Okay, well, welcome. Let me call the meeting to order. We have, like I mentioned, a quorum. You all received an agenda last week, a proposed agenda for the meeting. I would entertain a motion from a council member to approve the agenda.
This is Leland, so moved.
Thank you, Leland. Is there a second?
Joe Havasu, I second.
Thanks, Joe. Any debate or discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Any abstentions? That's unanimous. You also, earlier this week, received the meeting notes of the November 4 meeting. I've received no corrections or revisions to those, so I will also entertain a motion to approve those meeting notes. Someone willing to do that?
So moved.
Thank you, Dave. Second?
I'll second it, Leland.
Thank you, Leland. Any debate or discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? Any abstentions? So that's unanimous. Let's move to the agenda item on committee reports, council project status and updates. We're going to start with Laura to try to provide us a brief media update. Laura?
Yep. Good morning, everybody. The media updates from pertaining to the Great Salt Lake Advisory Council are a little different than the meetings past. We don't have any direct press releases or reports out in the news, but some of the media updates have been more indirect. And the first one was an Salt Lake Tribune opinion piece on December 22nd. Peter Metcalf did an op-ed piece about Deb Haaland being the right choice for the Department of the Interior. But in that report, he mentioned the shrinking Great Salt Lake and the 12 water strategies and the importance of addressing these problems at the local level, and that, with federal support, I guess was his point. So that was an important shout out to the work that the council has supported. And then from that, Lynn DeFreitas and I were talking about how great it would be to get in touch with Peter, given his connection and enthusiasm for the lake. And so we ended up doing that and had a meeting with him on Monday. And I can talk with folks who are interested about learning about that, but his focus was definitely getting businesses and publicly traded companies supported and involved in the lake. So that was the one media piece. The other one was in references to the conservation impact study that Bowen Collins did. There was again, another opinion piece in the Salt Lake Tribune that talked about the Lake Powell pipeline, but indirectly mentioned and was supportive of Weber County Conservation District's efforts to look at conservation with the conservation impact study that Bowen and Collins did. So an indirect shout out to the work that the Great Salt Lake Council is supporting. So the other thing that I wanted to highlight or shout out is a recent publication in the Catalyst magazine. I don't know how many of you saw it, but Bonnie Baxter and Jamie Butler did a piece on the Great Salt Lake obituary. And it also references the reports that the council has endorsed. And it also just talks about the unique features of the Great Salt Lake, why it's awesome and why we should save it. But it's kind of I'm not even sure what kind of tone it is. It's not a sarcastic tone, but I'll put the link in the chat and you guys will have to check out this Catalyst article because it's pretty cool. And with that, I think that's all the media updates I have, unless there's anyone else that has noticed anything else. Oh, looks like Jamie just put it in the chat. So check that out. It's pretty great.
Thank you very much, Laura. We have several other projects ongoing, as you know. The contractors are with some help with public relations, focus on the recent strategy analysis for the document completed, as well as with some other facts. We have our funding's continued for the USGS study on nutrient balance cycling, and we understand the data has been collected in the analysis stage, and hopefully later this year we'll have them presented one of our. We also agreed to expand in the conservation impact analysis, and we're doing the paperwork on that now. And we also agreed at the last week support reuse study. We will report that.
Hey, Don, Don, your audio is a little choppy. I'm not sure if there's anything you could try differently, or if anyone has any suggestions.
Well, it might be the call, because when you were presenting, let me see what I is presenting.
I turned off my video to help my audio get better.
Also, there's a couple people with their microphone on that might help as well.
If everybody could mute, that would be lovely.
Okay, is that better? All right, Leland, are you with us?
I am.
Far away.
You want me to report on it, right?
Yes.
Okay. The project is related to reuse of wastewater. We are in the process of working on the project right now. The current scope is we're sending out surveys to all the wastewater utilities that discharge in or around Great Salt Lake, that make it to the Great Salt Lake. And as part of that survey, we're asking what their plans are for reuse, what their flows are, and then what future plans they have for reuse that might be taken into consideration. We're looking at the cost associated with having to move to reuse. There's additional treatment in most cases that has to be done. And then we're working with DNR in looking at the modeling of what impact that reuse may have to the Great Salt Lake in terms of loss of water, or in terms of lake elevation. That's the general scope of the project. There is some who are concerned about the project, particularly whether or not it suggests that reuse will or should occur. And we're trying to encourage people to understand it's not to talk about the validity or the benefit or the harm of reuse, just simply the impact. And that's it.
Thank you, Leland. Any questions? Okay, our last update, last Candace Hawes speaker to comment briefly on the status of the storage report study model up. Their study is not completed, but I understand that it will be by our next meeting. Candace?
Good morning. Thanks for having me today. And I am excited to announce, and you guys should all know, that the study was completed. We've asked Jake Sarago, who is one of our modeling folks on that team, to present in detail, I believe in March. Is that correct, Laura? Great. But just from a high level overview, we did complete a phase 1 study in which we developed a joint Bear River planning model with the Idaho Department of Water Resources, Pacific Corp, and also in conjunction with Wyoming. And our main purpose was to understand what the impacts would be if we changed the model within the model, changed the Pacific Corp March 31st target elevation, so increase the PCE and the max flow through Gentile Valley, to understand if we could store more water in Bear Lake if we changed some of the operations. The significant findings of the report is that we could store more water. We would have to accommodate the increased downstream flows through Gentile Valley, though. And we do want to do an additional phase on the model to understand what could be done with that water, right? At this point, we understand that there's a volume that could be available, but we don't really have a plan yet on how it could be used. So that's just some initial kind of findings, and Jake Sarago will do a better job of going through the results of the March meeting.
Great, thank you, Candace. Any questions, Candace?
I did just want to add, we have met with more than several of you regarding this topic, and we are working to schedule stakeholder meetings probably toward the end of February, mid to end of February. So that would be the other thing I would mention, is that we will get those stakeholder meetings scheduled in February.
Thank you. Any questions?
I do, Don, if that's okay.
Sure, fire away, Jeff.
Candace, the one thing that when I was participating in those meetings that was important and that we were also taking into account are any impacts to the Great Salt Lake. If you store more water in Bear Lake, that water is used, and then in return, either that water goes back into the system. It may save some evaporation on the Great Salt Lake, but also isn't the goal of your efforts there to determine what impacts, if any, are going to happen to the Great Salt Lake?
Yes, and we did estimate those initial impacts to the Great Salt Lake, but once again, we didn't really have how would the water be used. If part of the water was used with the intention of putting it down in a later portion of the season, then that could benefit the Great Salt Lake in that way. So yes, that is one of the things that we are looking at for sure.
Great, other
Donna?
questions? Go ahead.
Looks like Zach Frankel has his hand raised.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me?
Fire away, yeah, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Candace, Utah Rivers Council would like to be involved in this discussion, so if you could contact us, we'd like to have some more information about the purpose of Bear River development in terms of municipal water demand. And we're especially concerned about the fact that there's been no economic analysis about how the cost of the project will increase water rates and reduce any municipal need for the water project. We produced a number of studies which have not been considered in the dialogues and conversation about this project, and we think it's really time that they stop being ignored. So we'd love it if you'd reach out to Utah Rivers Council and have one of these stakeholder meetings. We've been involved in Bear River development for 22 years, so we'd really like to be approached for these dialogues. Thank you.
Sure, we'd be happy to reach out to you. I'll send you a link that has a Google form link to just put in your information, and we'll get you on the outreach list.
Thank you.
Thank you, Candace. Zach, any other questions? Great, thank you for that. Let's move to the next item on our agenda. Fremont Island acquisition. I'm sure most of you have heard about that. We provided Laura for Utah Division for Fire and State Lands, and others from the Standing Dave and just well. Fire away.
So Don, couldn't hear you too well, but hope everybody can hear me. This is Dave Livermore. Just wanted to introduce all of you to Elizabeth Kitchens, who is our Associate State Director. And as many of you are in these situations, I do all the talking. Elizabeth does all the hard work, and she did a wonderful job making Fremont Island come together, as you'll hear in a minute. I also wanted to really acknowledge Brian, your team, Laura and Jamie and others. We couldn't have done this project without Forestry, Fire and State Lands, and really the leadership and willingness. They stepped forward to make this happen. Others, of course, Chris Monty, who's on the call, he started looking to this island purchase back in the 90s. And of course, special thanks to Ella, who helped locate our conservation buyers. So last year was a pretty tough year, but there have been a few points of light. And I think this is a great story and is one of them. I hope you enjoy, I know you will enjoy Elizabeth's presentation.
Well, hi, everybody, and thanks for the introduction, Dave. Nice to see some familiar faces on Zoom. Or we're not on Zoom, we're on Google. Apologies, we use Zoom at the Nature Conservancy, so that's what I'm used to. I hope everybody can hear me. And I'm not as familiar with Google Meet, so I hope I can get my presentation started. Give me a second here. Share my screen. Hopefully you all can see that. And I can't see anybody at this point. But
You can see it just fine, Elizabeth.
I can hear you. All right, great. So many of you probably already know some of the history of Fremont Island. I have to admit that I really did not until I started working on this transaction late last year, which really was a bright spot at the end of a pretty crazy year. So thank you for inviting us to talk about our fun project. First, I want to ask, though, how many people know how many islands there are in Great Salt Lake? Well, I'll just answer it for you. The answer is it depends. It actually depends on the fluctuation of the lake level, which makes sense. But most frequently, there are about 15 islands in the lake. Today, we are talking about the third largest island in the lake, Fremont Island, which you can see there on this map. And of course, when Lake Bonneville existed way back when, the lake level was much, much higher, obviously. And the chunk of land that we know today as Fremont Island was under several hundred feet of water, and only the very tops of Stansbury and Antelope Islands were above water. And we know that Fremont Island has a very interesting history, of course. These two fellows made a day trip out there, Messrs. Fremont and Carson. They went out to the island to do some mapping and survey work, and Carson carved a cross into this very large black rock out on the island. And this just shows a little bit of the more history and facts of the island. It's about 3,000 acres, as I said, the third largest one. Well before Fremont and Carson landed on the island, we know from relics that have been found that ancient Native Americans inhabited the island off and on for quite some time, probably in connection with the larger communities that they had over on the eastern shore of the Great Salt Lake, which were prevalent until around the late 16th century, when there was a massive population decline. Another story that is, and I wanted to mention that Fremont and Carson named the island Disappointment Island because and apparently they were very disappointed in the island and was later named Fremont Island. So another story that is often told is of Kate Wenner Noble and her husband, Uriah, who were a prominent Salt Lake family. And they moved out to the island when Uriah was diagnosed with tuberculosis. They took their two children, George and Blanche, out to the island and seeking fresher air for Uriah. And the account of their trip from the mainland over to the island that I read is quite harrowing. You know, their dogs and all their belongings, and it was a stormy, and apparently it took 3 days, which is hard to imagine, but that's the story that I read. And in 1886, they purchased a part of the island from the Union Pacific Railroad, and then homesteaded the rest. And apparently this was a kerfuffle in and of itself because another family was living on the island, and basically the Wenners ousted them. So the Wenners lived several years on the island, raised their sheep, sent the sheep off to market on a boat across the island. Uriah died in 1891 and is buried out on the island. And while Kate and the children moved away from the island, she did write a memoir, and her ashes are buried out on the island with Uriah. So over the decades, Fremont Island seems to have sparked numerous development proposals. So we're fast forwarding here a number of decades. And I'm not going to dive into all of the development proposals that have been brought up. There's very difficult access issues, as we know. There's no road out to the island. The only access is by boat or across the lake bed, and that requires permission from the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, and results in significant damage to the lake bed. So with those challenges, no development really came to fruition. So fortunately, that means that it has remained in a relatively undisturbed and natural state as part of the Great Salt Lake ecosystem that provides globally important habitat for shorebirds and waterfowl, as we all know. So with those, we have, as Dave mentioned, the Nature Conservancy had attempted to purchase the island or work with conservation buyers in the past, to no avail until just this last summer. Thanks to Ella Sorensen for planting the seed with her good friend, Jennifer Spears, who, as you all know, is a great philanthropist, and she is also the chair of our board here in the Nature Conservancy in Utah. So after Ella, thank you, Ella, contacted Jennifer. Jennifer called up Dave and myself and Ann at the Nature Conservancy to explore how, if she could purchase this island, could we conserve it for all time? And basically a discussion ensued as to how that would best work. We thought that what made the most sense was if Jennifer could negotiate a deal with the current landowner, she would then donate a conservation easement to the Nature Conservancy with appropriate restrictions, and that would end up protecting the property. But it didn't really make sense for Jennifer or her foundation. Her foundation, the Palladium Foundation, is actually who was the purchaser. It didn't make sense for them to retain fee title. So that's when we thought of the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands as the most logical entity for Jennifer to donate fee title to, subject to the conservation easement. As we know, the division has jurisdiction over the lake bed and is the state agency that is primarily responsible for managing the lake. And so that is the plan that unfolded over about 3 months. Late last year, we were able to close the transaction, both the conservation easement donation and the fee title donation, simultaneously on December 4th. So the easement terms, so basically the Nature Conservancy acted as an intermediary between Jennifer and the division so that we could work out the easement terms beforehand. And this is a press release that came out a couple of days afterwards. It was really some great news coverage. Again, at the end of a crazy year, it was nice to have this bright spot in the media. So the easement terms I'll cover just very quickly. You know, the Nature Conservancy obviously was interested in protecting that natural habitat and the conservation values for the migratory birds and such. So no motorized recreational uses are permitted. However, sorry, I said that wrong. Motorized recreational uses are prohibited, but non-motorized recreational uses are allowed, along with facilities such as picnic areas, shade structures, related facilities such as bathrooms. Those are all allowed. It's the residential, industrial, and agricultural development and mining that are prohibited. Motorized vehicle use is only allowed for the division's management purposes. And the daily details of an overall management will be outlined in a property management plan that Laura will develop. And I'm going to turn it over to her in just a minute to let her talk a little bit about that. But I wanted to end with just a few fun photos. Here's Jennifer Spears and Ella. and Andrea Nelson from our Nature Conservancy office. They actually found Carson's Cross. I don't know if you can see it there on the slide, but they were able to find Carson's Cross when they went out via helicopter to the island after Jennifer had closed on the acquisition. And finally, as Dave has already mentioned, I want to just say thank you so much to the division and the great team, Brian and Laura and Jamie and Emma Whitaker, who handled the legal end of things. Jason, you all had great patience with us as we worked through everything, and just really excited that this island is now finally protected. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura, and then I think I have time for questions, but let me see if I can stop sharing and get back to the main screen. I hope that worked.
Yep, you're no longer sharing.
Great.
Thanks so much,
Excellent.
Elizabeth. And thanks to the Nature Conservancy for thinking of us when you have an island that you need to find a good home for. We, if you would have asked us at the beginning of the year if you thought the Department of Natural Resources would own a new island at the end of the year, we would have said no way. So I'm glad it all came together, and I'm glad it all worked out. But now it's our responsibility to manage the island in perpetuity and under the guise of the conservation easement. And so our first steps, as Elizabeth mentioned, is our first step is to do a property management plan, and we just kicked off that meeting yesterday with our in-house team, and we're going to put something together. I think what we're most concerned about as far as management is access. Undeniably, people coming, wanting to explore the island, it's not for the faint of heart, it's not easily accessed. And so I think our biggest concern is access. Also cultural preservation. How do we make sure that the resources out there are protected? And then of course, bird habitat, and making sure that although the island is a disappointment to some, I think it's of benefit to the birds and folks who want to check it out. So we want to make sure that we cover, protect all the resources, improve conditions out there. It's pretty weedy. We'd like to get a weed management plan going. So there's a bunch of things we know we need to work on. We're going to start cleaning it up, remove a backhoe that's out there and a pickup truck are things that we're interested in taking care of. But I did just want to talk about access for a second in case people ask you all as council members and stakeholders just what it means to go out there. Elizabeth mentioned you can get out to the island. Well, there are three ways you can get out to the island. You can get out by airboat. You would need to leave through the Antelope Island State Park Marina, and it's about 6 miles. And we would definitely recommend an airboat. With the low water levels, you need a flat bottom boat to get out there. So that's one way. The other way is by foot or by bike, non-motorized bike, that you would need to leave from the Davis County Causeway. And that is also a 6-mile trek. And there's a bit of a berm that you can kind of follow. I actually did ride out there once, and I don't know if I would ever do it again. It was deceivingly tricky. So, and then the other way is by air, and people would need a permit to land any aircraft on the island from us, from the division before you do that. And we are actually working with some pilots associations across the state of Utah to figure out how to handle air traffic on the island, because that's not something that's in our management purview on all of our other sovereign land bodies. So access is definitely what we're concerned about. Know that if you do go out, you have to pay the Antelope Island Park entrance fee, which is $15 for vehicles and $3 by bike. Or you could ride out by parking in front of the Antelope Island Causeway and then riding out to the lake bed that way. So anyway, we have been in close contact with state parks. We wanted to give them a heads up, let them know what was happening. They're supportive of what we're doing. They're helping us look out for, just kind of what's going on out there, being the eyes on the ground, and we'll help with rescues as needed. But we're really hoping that we can minimize any of the chaos out there. But with increased visitation and recreation, or increased opportunities for people recreating this past year, we anticipate that it could be pretty. There could be some search and rescue issues out there, just visitation issues in general. So we're not anticipating going out there and putting any shade structures or picnic tables out there or anything right now. It's not out of the question in the future, but we won't allow roads and any other big permanent infrastructure to be out there. So with that, Jamie Barnes or Brian Cottam, if I missed anything, please holler. But that's all I have on Fremont Island. Are there any questions? No questions. I did have just one thing to say. I did want to help or say thank you to, in addition to the Nature Conservancy, to Davis County for their efforts and their willingness to take on this project, because access to the island is from Davis County. So while the island is in Weber County, Davis County has been a tremendous help in helping us figure out how we're going to manage the island. So thanks to them. All right, I don't see any anything.
Just to add a little bit of humor here, we've been very fortunate, of course, to work with Brian, Laura, and Jamie, and so forth, especially Fire State Lands, and of course Jennifer Spears, an amazing person, conservation buyer. One of her friends said, "I read you bought this island. If you have to buy an island, why don't you buy an island in the Caribbean? Why would you buy it in the middle of the Great Salt Lake?" So we're lucky for our friends who care about the natural resources.
We tried to convince Dave at the outset to buy a Caribbean island. He just wouldn't go for it. Like, come on, man.
We're working on it. So many thanks to all involved.
All right, Don, we'll turn it back over to you unless you just want to go straight to Ella.
Thank you, Conservancy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is that better?
Much better.
All right. So I closed my internet connection, and I'm just on the telephone now, so I can't see you. But thank you for that report, Nature Conservancy and Laura. Any further questions or comments about Fremont acquisition? Okay, let's move to the Gilmore Sanctuary expansion. Our understanding is that there's an additional 400 acres, and we'll ask Ellen to explain that to us.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, Ella.
Okay, I am having trouble getting up my present now, a window. It's not coming up, Laura. You want to put your screen up for me and we'll just do next?
Yeah, I'll pull mine up now, Ella, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
One second. I did have it up.
Okay, I think I've got it up now. Can you see it? Laura?
I can't.
You cannot
No.
see it?
No.
Okay, then keep trying to get yours up.
Okay. I'm almost there.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay, can you all see my screen?
No.
Oh. Try.
Okay, there it is. I can see
Okay.
it.
Okay, you got it?
Okay, it's not on present mode. But that's okay. We can just,
Nope. I'm moving that way. There we go. How's that?
okay, you've got 2 slides on there where we just need one at a time.
It's showing presenter view, Laura.
Oh, what presenter?
Okay, I mean, we can actually go from that if possible. Oh, good. Okay.
Okay.
Ready?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
First of all, I'd like to thank Dawn and Laura for inviting me to talk about this exciting expansion. Gilmore Sanctuary is located along 3.5 miles of the shoreline of Great Salt Lake in Salt Lake County. It is 4 miles from Antelope Island. Next. Thousands of years ago, the Jordan River flowed through this area, forming a large delta as it entered the Great Salt Lake. Next. Then the river shifted to the east, leaving a topography of channels and islands, dry but intact. Next. In 1994, the Mitigation Commission funded Audubon to do a study to determine the feasibility of returning water to the old dry delta to restore thousands of acres of wetlands. Next. Captivated by Audubon's vision, Florence Gilmore, the largest landowner in the study area, donated 1,319 acres in 1995 and 1996 to Audubon, creating the Audubon Gilmore Sanctuary. Next. In partnership between Audubon and the Mitigation Commission and assistance from the Nature Conservancy, the sanctuary has grown piece by piece until today it covers about 3,600 acres. Next. But back in 2004, there was a slight problem. Audubon controlled 2,200 acres of land. We also owned 3,000 acre-feet of water from the North Point Canal, but we had no route to deliver the water to the land. Next. Since 1927, 4 generations of the Bothwell-Swanner family have owned 3,000 acres in the northwest quadrant of Salt Lake City. The land use has been agricultural. Glenn Bothwell helped create the North Point and Brighton Canal, so important to the area today. Next. Christine Pedroncelli, since 1997, has been custodian over this land, and since the 1990s, Maureen Davison has taken the stewardship of this large tract of land in the northwest quadrant. Next. Audubon met the family in 1997 and have worked with them for 21 years. They owned the land which held the vital connection to get water to the land. In 2005, they donated to Audubon a 1/2 mile canal easement and an 8-acre flowage easement, thus providing the missing link. Next. In 2007 and 2008, a large water delivery system costing $350,000 was implemented using all of these old river channels with as small amount of earth moving as possible. Funding was from NRCS, the Mitigation Commission, Jennifer Spears, and Florence Gilmore. Next. Okay, we're kind of missing the top, but that's okay. On July 8th, 2009, on Bothwell Swanner property, the floodgates were opened, sending Jordan River water flowing back into the Delta. Next. Next. Jordan River water flowed down those old channels for the first time in thousands of years. Next. Water for the entire sanctuary follows one of two routes. Both are located on Bothwell Swanner property. Next. On December 15th, 2020, after selling over 2,000 acres of land in the Northwest Quadrant to the prison and to developers in the Inland Port area, the family ended a 4-generation era in the area with the donation of land to National Audubon. A quote from Wayne Martinson, who was a National Audubon employee actively involved in Gilmore Sanctuary creation. The donation of 413 acres is one of the most significant pieces. The land is glorious unto itself, but the donation also greatly completes the land management capacity for the entire Gilmore Sanctuary. The donation protects the land holding the vital infrastructure from adjacent incompatible uses and has great intrinsic value and fantastic restoration potential for wildlife. Next. The gift of land worth over $1 million plus an endowment was made in honor of Christine Bothwell Pedroncelli, who passed away in September. Next. Our future plans for restoration include removing invasive plants like tamarisk and Russian knapweed. Next. It will allow us to reconnect lands that we had to sever because we did not own the Epperson or Bothwell Swanner property. We will be able, this long dike is over 2,000 feet long. We will be able to reconnect the water flow in the old delta. Next. And third, we will be adding a few water control structures and shallowly flood the mudflats for shorebirds. About half of the property is actually low playa area that we can restore. Next. Habitat for millions of shorebirds on Great Salt Lake is exponentially decreasing due to development, water diversions, and phragmites and other factors. This gift to Gilmore Sanctuary will contribute to land preserved on the edge of Great Salt Lake and will hopefully provide thousands of acres of habitat for birds for centuries. And I would like to thank Anne and Heidi and Laura and Maureen for comments on this thing. Thank you.
All right, trying to stop sharing.
Great job, Bella. Congratulations.
Thank you, Dave.
All right, any other questions for Ella about her new acquisition?
Thank you, Ella. Laura, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Our next item on the agenda is a review of legislation that we anticipate might be considered in the upcoming legislative session relating to Great Salt Lake. I've asked Tim Hawks of the House of Representatives to lead that discussion, share what he knows, and then we're going to ask individuals in the meeting to share their knowledge and comments. Tim, fire away.
Well, thanks, Don. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Good to be with you, and exciting to hear about all this great conservation work that's been going on with these other projects. So 3 things quick. One is I just say, I think, at least in terms of usual standard, it's probably going to be a fairly quiet session for water. And I think that's a good thing. And the reason it's a good thing is that we've had some major pieces of water legislation move in recent years, particularly water banking, but we've also had legislation passed on watershed councils, split season leases, many other things. And it's probably good to just sit back and let some of those things develop and mature and evolve. Good illustration, many of you have been engaged in it. We've had the HCR 10 working group going on this last session, and that group has submitted its report, but there's just a lot of positive momentum, and I think we're headed in a good direction, but I think it will be a fairly quiet session when it comes to water. The other thing, there are a few bills that I'm aware of, and some of you may be aware of more. That's understandable just because of the nature of the legislative process. Bill files are often confidential, and unless it's been circulating in the broader water community, sometimes we just don't know what's out there. But there are a few bills and appropriations requests I'm aware of, and I think there's probably folks in here that may be aware of some additional ones as well. And there are probably going to be some others that pop up over the course of the session, and that's very typical and to be expected. So the couple that I'd note, and they aren't always directly applicable to the lake, but they may implicate the lake in indirect ways. Representative Casey Snyder has House Bill 65, wildfire amendments. And I note it not because it's direct applicability to the lake, but because it creates a pay increase for firefighters that comes out of the Sovereign Lands Management account. Well, it's a fairly small appropriation. It can grow over time up to $200,000. And so that's just something to watch in terms of the balance of that fund over time. I've talked to Director Cottom, and he's on the phone. And they feel pretty confident that that's not going to undermine the stability of that fund in any way, but it's just one thing to keep an eye on. Representative Joel Ferry has House Bill 83. This is migratory bird production area amendments. And while I haven't spent a lot of time with that bill, the basic idea is just to encourage or facilitate the protection of wetland areas. And so there's obvious implications there for the lake. Representative Brady Brammer has a bill that's not numbered yet that establishes a Utah Lake Commission. Well, there's already a Utah Lake Commission, but it really kind of takes that to the next level. He's really trying to create a full-time commission with significant more resources and authority. So that one's just kind of interesting, I think, to watch in terms of does that work well, or does that create impediments? Here in the Great Salt Lake, we've had a different model, much more informal. The Great Salt Lake Advisory Council has accomplished a lot of great things. And so it's just going to be interesting to kind of see how that model in Utah Lake continues to evolve if that legislation goes through. So that's all I have in terms of bills. I think there are a couple of appropriations requests worth pointing out for this group. One is Representative Ferry will be out. A group. It's focused really on agricultural water, but the idea is to identify key innovations and sort of how do we get past obstacles and really get these types of technologies or whatever it might be, strategies widely implemented. And I think Representative Ferry actually got an appropriation last session, and then with the COVID funding cuts, it got taken back, and I think he's going to be looking to reestablish some of that funding. I've also been talking to Marcel Shoup about a couple that I might run or somebody else might run, but there's kind of 4 of those, and a lot of those come out of the HCR 10 process. One is really just one of the key recommendations coming out of HCR 10 was this idea of exploring the nexus between land use and water planning, because those two planning processes often occur in a vacuum, and really need to find ways to sync them if we want to manage our water effectively, and to get, each piece talking to each other, so that those land use decisions aren't made in isolation or without consideration to impacts either to water resources for human use or for the environment. The second one is better understanding, probably partnering with USGS to better understand groundwater inflow to the Great Salt Lake. What are the volumes at stake? How much is coming in? Where is it coming in? So that we know how to protect those resources. Another idea is dealing with really looking at the lower Bear and looking at working agricultural lands and what role do they play in the ecosystem of Great Salt Lake. So working agricultural lands, even flood irrigation can provide important habitat for fish and wildlife. It creates a certain return flow and groundwater recharge regime. And if we think about that landscape changing, what does that mean for the future? And I think there's an interesting alignment there where the preservation of agricultural lands may facilitate and help preserving the Great Salt Lake ecosystem. The last one, that again, it's just an idea that's being kicked around, really deals with kind of conservation incentives and barriers to conservation, and maybe a study to look at, what are those barriers and how can we more effectively align those incentives. A good example there would be historically, like in the economic development context here in the state of Utah, it's really been driven by jobs, jobs, jobs. Can we incentivize a company to come here because they're going to bring the jobs that are going to help drive our economy? And I think as Utah has been so successful in attracting a new business and has such a fast-growing economy, we need to change economic development. And maybe we take into effect, when we're looking at incentives for businesses, are they going to bring a significant environmental impact with them, or a real need for infrastructure that's going to be costly for the state or for a locality? So those are just some ideas that are being kicked around for appropriations requests. Those appropriations requests need to be finalized in the next couple of weeks, because in the legislative session we do appropriations really front-loaded the first couple weeks of session, and then we move into the substantive bills. So those are the ones that I'm aware of. I'm happy to take questions on that, or we can just do the round robin and see what else everybody else is aware of.
Tim, I had a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
First, thank you for the record-breaking session last year, and of course, your efforts on HCR 10 have really borne fruit. We're very, very grateful for your leadership on all these water issues. Going back to water banking, which was another amazing effort of yours and others on the call here, there have been a number of pilot projects as part of that bill. What is your vision for the pilot projects? What do you hope that they will demonstrate?
Thanks for the question, Dave. I think the really what we hope to see with those pilot projects is to show that this can work, and it can work in different contexts and settings and different geographic areas. I think the real strength of the water banking concept is that it is inherently flexible and adaptable. And hopefully, because those do cover different geographies and probably a different mix of water users, we really just get to test drive the concept and prove to folks that it can work. So beyond that, I mean, I think that's really it. We can a lot of people wonder, you can debate it in the abstract, but as they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and an effective pilot project is probably worth even more.
Great, thanks.
Looks, Lynn has politely raised her hand.
Regarding water banking, I just wanted to mention that on the 21st of January from 10 until noon, there's going to be a 6-month update on the water banking strategy project. And I sent the Zoom or Google information to Laura Vernon, so she can share that with you. And then you can check in and see where things have been going since this effort began.
Thanks for highlighting that, Lynn. I think that's a great way to check back in.
Other questions or other legislative insights you'd like to share?
Representative Hawks, it's Brian Cottam. Have you heard anything about a possible effort to get a state monument designation for Spiral Jetty? We've heard a little bit and think it might be in the works for this session.
I have not. I've not heard about that, Brian, but I think that's one to watch. I could see something like that coming. Does Forestry, Fire, and State Lands have a position on that? Are you supportive of that?
We are supportive. It's been Representative Ferry that I think has led the discussion, and ultimately for folks, it's a designation that goes through state parks here at DNR. But the Spiral Jetty has been considered for a couple of years since this designation came about through legislation a few years ago. Laura, chime in, because I know you've been part of the discussions. The county is part of the discussions. DIA, the foundation that actually owns the Spiral Jetty art, they've been part of it. I think there generally is support, and we are part of that support.
I do know that COVID drove the use of that place through the roof. It's been pretty extraordinary.
It really has. Extraordinary is a good word for it. There's some other words as well. Massive amounts of use.
If anybody wants, this is Jamie Butler. If anybody wants to know about that, we do have a car counter that we maintain on that road that we have data for all of that.
Thanks, Jamie. I concur with Brian in the support for the designation, hoping that we could get some more protections and or funds and an outhouse out there perhaps. So we'll see.
Other legislative or comments on legislation for the upcoming session?
I just had one comment on that. This is Jeff Scott. We have talked in our commission meeting, and we've looked at getting some sort of an outhouse out there. At one time, I think it was towards the beginning of the summer, there were actually a couple of radio stations in Salt Lake that were mentioning that it would be great to get outdoors, and they specifically mentioned the Spiral Jetty, and we had, literally hundreds of vehicles going out there. And it's a great location, but without a little bit more infrastructure out there, it can become a public health risk. I won't go into details, but some of the things that people are leaving behind out there, you don't want to see. And so there needs to be a little bit of work out there if this is going to take place.
Thanks, Jeff. Other comments?
Sorry, Don, I just would like to add, Commissioner Scott, we are working with your roads department and state tourism on some access issues out there for improving conditions. So hopefully we'll be talking further about that.
Thank you, Laura. Any other comments, questions? Okay, let's move to the next agenda item, public comments. Is there anyone in the meeting who would like to make a brief public comment?
I would.
Lynn politely raised her hand again.
Both hands.
Speak out.
Okay, thank you very much. I promised at our last meeting in November that I would provide you with an update on the status of the Great Salt Lake Issues Forum. And given the COVID disposition and, rollout of vaccines, we have decided to postpone until May of 2022. The dates for that will be May 11, 12, and 13th. So stay tuned for that. And then one other announcement I have, in November, Promontory Point Resources submitted their application to the Division of Waste Management and Radiation Control for a Class 5 permit. A Class 5 permit would allow Promontory to receive out-of-state waste at the location on Promontory Peninsula. In my conversations with the division, the draft permit is likely to be available sometime in February for public comment. So hopefully you'll take a look at that, and possibly there might be room on the agenda for a future meeting for that issue to come before the council to be presented. So thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Lynn. Other individuals who'd like to share a comment? Hearing none, we'll move to the next item on the agenda, member discussion.
Don, I have a hand up. This is Steve Erickson.
Okay, Steve, sorry, I'm on my phone, not on the computer. So.
I see why you couldn't see. Just very briefly, I want to alert you all that we expect a draft environmental impact statement to be released sometime in mid to late February that could spill over into March. For the Central Iron Water Conservancy District's proposal to pump and pipe water from the Pine Valley, groundwater amounting to some 15,000 acre feet annually to Cedar City for municipal and industrial use. The plan is for expansion of that to the Wawa Valley, which is actually east of Pine Valley, and to Hamlin Valley, which is south of Snake Valley and west of Pine Valley. It's a very remote section of the state. It's a very dry section of the state. We anticipate the same kinds of groundwater impacts from this project as we saw with the Southern Nevada Water Authority's groundwater development plan in the West Desert. This could have implications for the groundwater table beneath Great Salt Lake, and certainly has implications for the water flow, underwater flow into Fish Springs National Wildlife Refuge. So put that on your radar screen for that draft environmental impact statement.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else wanting to make a comment?
Yes, I'd like to speak. This is Zach Frankel. Just to be real quick, we have reviewed a new report that came out near the end of 2019 on the economic impacts of Bear River development and on the cities of the Wasatch Front that it's intended to serve. And I think it would be something this body would really appreciate digging into. And it was prepared by a couple of economists at the University of Utah. We had a conference on it in the fall of 19 that was really successful when we presented it to cities, and we would like to bring those economists back to this body and present it, and would love the opportunity to do that. It's specific to Bear River development. And I think is something that I think most of the people on this committee would appreciate having that information presented to them, especially with graphics. And so I'd love to have the opportunity to do that at a future committee meeting. So, and with that, I thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Zach. Any other public comments? Hearing none and seeing none, we'll move to the next item. Are there any council members who have issues, priorities, actions, et cetera, that'd like to discuss or raise?
I had one, Dave Livermore again. We have a new governor, a lieutenant governor, and I wonder if in terms of council priorities, if we could make outreach to both a priority. I don't know if we invite them to a meeting, or obviously it's all on Zoom now, so a little harder, or even lieutenant governor. But I know you've been working with Brian Steed and others. I just wanted to put that as a priority over the next few months or even this year to connect with Governor Cox.
Okay, thank you, Dave. We'll make a contact and see what time frame might be available. Other discussion and recommendations from council members? Suggestions for future meeting topics? Okay, hearing none, let's look at the bottom of the agenda. Our meeting schedule for this year, we meet on the second Wednesday at 10 a.m. Our next meeting will be Wednesday, March 10th. I assume it'll be a virtual meeting again. And then the following meetings for the rest of the year, May 12, July 14, September 8, and November 10. If any council members have conflicts with those dates in the future, will you please let me know? Any other business? Thank you for participating. We had a good group. By my count, we had 60 people participating at one time or another in our meeting, and we appreciate the interest and the involvement. And Laura, thanks for your help in putting the meeting together. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Joe Havasu, I second.
Thanks, Joe. Any debate or discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? Any abstentions? Our meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everyone, very much for taking the time to participate.